Welcome back to Welsh Miniature Board Gamer, and today we're going to have a look at these Frostgrave Gnolls and how I can sort of improve on the one little niggle I have about them, and that is the way that the head or neck joins to the head. So it's like a knuckle and divot sort of connection, or a ball and socket connection if you will, but it leaves this sort of weird, sort of almost looking like the poison spitting dinosaurs from Jurassic Park. You know, it looks like it's almost like they got a frill around their head, and it doesn't look particularly brilliant. It's my only real problem with these miniatures is that. So yeah, we're going to see if I can improve it a bit. So this is going to be using milliput. So if you've never used milliput before, this might be a good way of sort of learning how to use it also. So you're going to need a scalpel or X-Acto knife. You're going to need some milliput, preferably the standard milliput, not the fine stuff. That's a little bit hard to work with. Now, I'm no expert working with this stuff, but I have used it quite a bit in the past. So the main thing is keep it airtight. Do not let this stuff get activated in the air. So I've had mine for years and years, and mine has gone a little bit harder than it should have. But we want equal cuts of this stuff because it is a two-part epoxy, meaning that you need equal amounts in order for the epoxy to activate and go hard. So if you line them up and then sort of do a line across both of them, you will get a suitable amount of each of the epoxy. So once you finish, wrap them up like so no air will get to them. As you can see, mine's gone a little bit hard, so I'm going to have to work a little bit harder to mix them. But, like I said, mine is a couple of years old, so if you do keep it dry, do keep it away from air, it does last. Now, we're going to use water to keep our hands wet so this epoxy doesn't stick to us too much. Now, if you use too much water, it will make it quite slimy and a little bit too malleable. So you want it sort of happy medium, but if you do add too much more water, it just means it's going to take longer to dry. So we're going to tear off pieces, maybe little sausage pieces or whatever, and then just push it into the gap like so. Now, I've pushed it a bit too much over them. Now, if you left it like this on the miniature, you would end up with like a cement-like, you know, texture being left on the miniature. So we don't really want that. So I'm pulling it back away, and I'll make sure that I don't leave any residue of the milliput on the miniature. So now I'm going around pushing the milliput with a wet tool into all the crevices I want to cover. Now I'm going to try and keep to the silhouette or the sculpt of the miniature, trying not to bulk it out too much. You know, I still want this miniature to sort of go in at the neck slightly and come back out at the shoulders. I don't want to lose the whole form of the miniature. So I'm just going to place it in place and work it into all of the gaps. Just carefully, for now, just pushing it down, trying to keep the form of the miniature correct, not making it too bulky, and trying to, you know, keep it looking like the sculpt was meant to be originally without changing it too much. Now, underneath, I'm not going to see that anywhere much, but I want to keep working at it. And at this point, it looks terrible, you know, it looks really awful. But if you keep working at it, pushing it under the neck, you know, just to build it out a little bit, we will come to putting texture now soon, and that will make a hell of a difference. But for now, we're just trying to get the basic shape of the mane. So we're just pushing it in, and we're just sculpting around, pushing it, getting it to the shape that we want to. Feathering it out so it's a little bit thinner as it gets to the body, etc. Because we don't want to cover up too much of the nice sculpt that is underneath. So we're doing this sort of chopping I'm doing, just feathering it out, chopping it out, making it thinner, dragging it slightly, adding a little bit of texture also. But yeah, really it's just the idea is that we're going to just get it into shape. So here I am pushing it back off the ears a little bit because, you know, hyenas or gnolls do have quite protruding ears, and I do want the ears to stick out, but not that sort of weird ridge. At this point also, I am adding some texture to the fur. So I do that by doing sort of a stab and pull motion. I'll get into more detail further on. But yeah, you sort of stab the tool in a little bit, making a little hole, and then just drag it down slightly, making little lines, loads of little lines. So this is the champion that I'm going to be doing as well. So I'm going to start by doing his mane. And it's exactly the same as I did on the previous miniature. I cut off a small piece and I sort of jam it into the gaps. Because to begin with, that's all we're doing, is fill in the gaps with the milliput. So we get the worst of it done. But of course we're keeping the ears, etc. clear because we don't want to hide those glorious giant jug-like ears that the Gnolls have got. And I'm sure they're very proud of. So then I'm going to make a cloak. I've decided I want to make this sort of fur, rugged looking cloak for my champion. So I'm going to roughly get sort of how much I need of this milliput. Now, I'm terrible at judging how much milliput I'm going to need for a job. So yeah, I'm trying to sort of... I'm doing a terrible attempt here of rollering out a piece of milliput. Roughly the size I want for my cloak. Now, I've made mine way too wet, so it's just clinging to everything, which is not ideal. But it doesn't matter, I can work around it. But I just want to get a rough amount that I need. So then we put it on the miniature and slowly start working, getting the shape that we want. So it doesn't have to be tidy, it doesn't have to be neat at this point. We're just trying to get it to lie over the shoulders and to lie on the back correctly, you know, just so we can start building it up. Now, it doesn't matter if you got too much, you can cut some off. If you've got too little, you can always add a little bit more and just sort of drag it out with the wet tool to sort of sculpt it as you go in. So here I'm just stretching him over his shoulders, around his back, pushing it down sort of under his neck, so, you know, it looks like it is being pulled around and under his neck to form, etc. And then I'm just sort of smoothing it out a little bit as I go, because I'll add texture later, but I really don't want too much of this sort of broken, sort of torn look. Although that is a look. But that's not what I'm going for here. I'm going for a more fur cloak, not a ragged, you know, rag, etc. So I go around pushing it to the form of the miniature. So I'm going in at his back and then out over its haunches. So I keep the sort of shape of the miniature underneath. So the cloak is sort of caressing the body, not just floating off of him, if that makes sense. So I'll carefully go around, smoothing it out, getting the folds in, getting it to form against the miniature, and then I have to sort of cut it around because I want it draping over the arm, and I do want this sort of flip at the end, so I need to sort of put that in now. It won't probably hold that well at the moment because it's still wet and quite floppy, but I'll keep going back to it and sort of putting the fold in. If there's any tears I can see, I can heal the tears by just pushing some more of the milliput up over it. Now I have to remember to do any seams on the inside of the cloak too, because we don't want them showing either. So we just go over it with the wet tool, just keep making it nice and tidy, nice and clean, making sure that it's quite smooth and quite, you know, quite nondescript at the moment. You know, we don't want too much wild marking. So I'm going to cut also the bottom of the cloak off because it was way too long. So yeah, at this point, there you go. It's looking much more sort of cloak-like. But we don't want it just being like a ragtag cloth cloak. We want this to be a fur, like pelt, if you will. So after we've sort of smoothed out all of our texture, we come back in and start adding the texture that we just completely removed. But we're adding a texture that we want. So this is the same method that I use on the main, and it is a stab and pull. So you just poke it and pull, poke it and pull, poke and pull, making thousands of little lines. If you think of it sort of like a sewing machine, so go in, out, in, out, in, out, and slowly move along it, or if you want a tattoo gun, whatever, you know, it's sort of that poke and drag, that sort of motion that we're kind of doing. Although I would hope a tattoo gun wouldn't drag, but I think you can see what I mean. It's sort of a poke and drag. That's all I can really describe. And it looks weird, but when you actually paint it, it will look like fur, because there are, you know, voids and rises very much like fur will look. So once we've finished doing these sort of motions, excuse this for being very slow motion, this is kind of what it's going to look like at this point before we've painted it. But you can see there's already a lot of interest there. There's a lot of texture, and it will come across as a pelt or a fur line type thing. So yeah, this is what I use on the mane and the cloak, and this kind of works. So let's have a look at what these look like once they are finished. So this is the non-modified miniature, and I'm bringing in the one that I've modified. As you can see, it fills in that gap, and I think it does look a lot better. I tried to do similar poses, though the colours are different, just so that you can see, you know, the difference a lot easier. So yeah, this I think is a definite improvement on the base miniature. Is it something that I would do for all of my Gnoll miniatures? No, definitely not. It would bother me more than I think it would bother most players. Most players will be just like, yeah, oh, that's cool, that's a Gnoll, I can see that, and that would be that. But me, I would see that join and it would bug me. But I know that I'm really making these miniatures more for my players than I am for myself. So yeah, I probably wouldn't actually go through all of the Gnolls, you know, making them, you know, look more anatomically correct. They look good enough as they were, but yeah, with a bit of milliput and a bit of effort, you can make them look a lot better and hide that strange sort of seam that they have where the join of the head goes to the neck. So yeah, I would say it's up to you whether you want to do this or not. It takes time, it takes effort, so, you know, it's really up to you. Whether you think that sort of background creatures are really that important, that they have to look, you know, better or not, or whether, you know, you'd spend a little bit more money and buy it like a metal Gnoll, and that would be, you know, something more like a character Gnoll, etc. So this is the champion that I did. This is the non-modified version. So yeah, he looks really good. I really like this miniature. He looks nice. With the cloak, which I've sculpted with the milliput, yeah, I think he looks better. I rather the milliput cloak. I kind of like the way it turned out, considering it was a very easy sculpt. You know, I haven't done anything groundbreaking or earth-shaking. It's just a matter of putting a bit of milliput on it and dragging that technique that I showed you on the video. So yeah, you know, this I hope is a good example of how to use milliput to someone who's never used it before, and, you know, or maybe you wanted to watch this to see how you could improve your Gnolls. Well, either way, I hope you found something to take out of this video. So if you liked it, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, all the usual sort of YouTubey stuff. But until next time, you've been watching Welsh Miniature Board Gamer.